This is future me interrupting past me. I recorded the intro to this episode before I sat down to edit it and did not realize how long Dustin and I actually talked. So there's going to be an awkward break at the end of this episode because, well, as you can see, it's already over the hour mark and there's like another 30, 45 minutes worth of material left to go. So that'll show up on the next Apocrypha episode, and my apologies to Dustin because I didn't realize that when we were recording that I kept him so long. And my also apologies for just kind of abruptly sticking his promo at the end of this episode since it doesn't naturally navigate into it, because that's actually in the other part of the recording. 2016 has claimed another victim, folks. 2016 has claimed another victim, folks. For a moment, I was worried that it was going to be Buzz Aldrin taken from us. But instead, it turns out that the Grim Reaper had a taste for Chinese takeout. The creator of General Tso's chicken has died at the age of 98.
And in my mother's womb was fashioned to be flesh in the time of 10 months, being compacted in blood of the seed of man.
That's right.
Of the seed of man.
The word seed is sperm, and sperm comes through having sex.
It's shut out of your father's rod,
right.
To put it in layman terms, in his penis.
That's right.
That means a man put his penis in a woman and bust off in it.
Then the angel said to him, "Take out the entrails of this fish, and lay up his heart, and his gall, and his liver for thee. For these are necessary for useful medicines."
The rest of the chapters of the book of Esther,
Go ahead.
which are found neither in the Hebrew nor in the Chaldee.
Greetings, fellow worker slaves, podcasting at 128 kilobits from the Fortress of Squalitude. This is the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. I'm your host, Tucker. Professor Fuzznuts is in the kitchen giving himself a bath and ignoring me when I'm recording for once. Yes, it's a podcast hosted by a guy and he's cat. Get over it. For this episode of the podcast, I'm joined by Dustin from the Atheist Nomads podcast. Dustin's a former seminary student who, while in pursuit of his master's, realized that religion was bullshit and walked away. I also owe Dustin a considerable debt because not only was his podcast one of my inspirations for starting this one, but he's helped me a lot on the technical side of things since I started. If you're not listening to his show, I recommend checking it out. And if he sees a huge spike in listener numbers after this episode's posts, I'm sure he'll be more than happy to come back on, if you know what I mean. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. A couple of other notes before we get to Dustin and I reading from the book of Judith. One is that I need to thank Amy for becoming a Patreon supporter of the show. I really appreciate it. If it weren't for folks like you, I wouldn't be able to continue with the show right now. All of you are a big, big help to me doing the podcast. No kidding. I woke up this morning and found that thanks to an unexpected bill hitting my bank account, I was down to less than $100 to start the week. The Patreon payment will be hitting my account in a couple of days, so I won't have to worry about starving until my check hits on Thursday. I had hoped to be able to post a Patreon-only episode this weekend, but unfortunately it's going to have to wait until after next weekend at the earliest. I'm going to be working overtime at my job next week, but my ride doesn't. So at the very least, I'm going to have to be walking to work every morning. So I'll be getting up at 3:30 in the goddamned morning. And if I can't find a ride home, I'll be walking then as well. Which means that if I want to be able to eat next week, I've basically got to prepare all my meals now. As you can imagine, that doesn't leave me a lot of time to do anything else. Don't know how things are going to progress the rest of the month. I imagine that if I'm still on overtime after next week, my ride will be on it as well. But you never know. Just have to wait and see. Lastly, I discovered Spotlight, the movie which recounts the Boston Globe's investigation into the Catholic Church's cover-up of sex abuse stories, is now on Netflix. If you've got a Netflix subscription and haven't seen the film yet, you really need to check it out. And yes, that is Fuzznuts you hear rattling his collar at me. Silly cat. I did a review of the film back in episode 106. I'll have a link to that in the show notes, along with a link to Dustin's podcast. I did rewatch Spotlight last night, and it still gets me as angry as it did the first time I watched it. Okay, now let's get to Justin and I reading from Judith.
In the 12th year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, weird spelling of Nebuchadnezzar, who reigned in Nineveh, the great city, in the days of Aphrodites, which reigned over the Medes in Ecbatane, and built in Ecbatane walls round about the stones, hewn 3 cubits broad and 6 cubits long, and made the height of the wall 70 cubits, and the breadth thereof 50 cubits.
Okay. And set the towers thereof upon the gates of it 100 cubits high, and the breadth thereof in the foundation 60 cubits. And he made the gates thereof, even gates that were raised to the height of 70 cubits, and the breadth of them was 40 cubits, for the going forth of his mighty armies, and for the setting in array of his footmen. So, 40-yard wide doors, because a cubit is roughly a yard? That's a bit hard to believe.
Yeah, that's pretty big.
Yeah.
That is pretty big. Considering a football field is 100 yards.
Yeah.
Even in those days, and I'm just going to pronounce it Nebuchadnezzar. Even in those days, King Nebuchadnezzar made war with King Aphrodites in the Great Plain, which is the plain in the borders of Ragau. And there came unto him all they that dwelt in the hill country, and all that dwelt by Euphrates and Tigris and Hyphates, and the plain of Arioch, the king of Elimanes, and very many nations of the sons of Calad assembled themselves to battle.
Any idea who Calad might be?
So that's from the King James. In the NRSV, it has it as the forces of the Chaldeans.
Wouldn't that be the Babylonians?
Yeah, roughly.
And Nebuchadnezzar was the king of whom?
In this case, Assyria. So we get a little bit more into time frames as this being after the temple was rebuilt. So this is post-exile. So it's a different King Nebuchadnezzar with a different kingdom.
Okay.
Who apparently... Okay, historically, what doesn't quite work here is the Persian Empire held supreme until overthrown by Alexander the Great.
Right.
So the odds of there being a king this great next to them, going to war with them, who is not Alexander, is not likely.
Right. And in Esdras, there is... I'm not even going to get all the... There was King Cyrus and whoever was the king that was in, the Persian king in 300.
Mm-hmm.
And another king. And there was all this weird stuff talking about them letting the Jews go, and yet the Jews somehow didn't leave, but they did leave, and when they left, they took everything of value in the kingdom. I mean, not just all their shit of value, but, whomever was king, whether it be Cyrus or Xerxes or whomever, they ordered everybody in the kingdom, give all your gold, silver, jewels, etc., to the Jews so they can go back to Jerusalem. Which, you're like, okay, how are these people leaving in 3 different waves, yet never leaving except in the last? So...
Now, it is plausible that Cyrus would have sent the Jews back home. He was known for doing that in secular histories. And he was also known in secular histories to give money for the building of new temples, because his view was he was the king of kings, and if the people in the different kingdoms under him were all praying to their gods, it can't be bad for him. And if he can try to make all of the gods happy, it won't be bad for him.
Yeah. Okay. That answers a few questions, but doesn't explain some other shit, which is totally not your fault. It's just the weird.
Right. Well, because he would not have given them all of the gold.
Right. Well, if you think about it, how can one king give everybody or give the Jews all the gold, and then the second king give the Jews all the gold, and then the third king give the Jews all the gold?
Yeah. The Persians were known for being generous, not insane.
Yeah. Yeah.
You do stuff like that, you don't have an empire anymore.
Well, yeah, and there's only a finite amount of stuff you can give away.
Yeah, and the whole point of an empire is to acquire wealth from everywhere around you. Not give it all to somebody else.
Right. It would be sort of like the president, whomever, giving everything to the Scientologists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is a really bad idea on innumerable levels.
And that would actually be more plausible than an ancient emperor doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Because if an emperor tried to do that, he would have been assassinated.
Oh, yeah. I read Josephus, was it The History of the Jews? One of his works where he gives the inner workings of the whole kingdom under Herod and, his successors. And it wasn't until I read that I actually understood things like Game of Thrones and the stories of the various kings of England, because it was like, well, yeah, unless you're the king, you have no surety that somebody won't try and kill you just for shits and giggles.
Yeah. Well, and even if you are the king, you still have no assurance.
Right, but it won't be for shits and giggles. It'll be because they're trying to take power. Whereas, if you're the king and you want somebody dead because, well, like the fact that they missed a certain spot on their face when they shaved that day.
Mm-hmm.
Then Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians, sent unto all that dwelt in Persia, and to all that dwelt westward, and to those that dwelt in Sicilia? Is that right?
Sure.
And Damascus and Libanus. Any idea where the fuck that is?
That would be Lebanon.
Okay. And Antilobanus? Where's that?
Not Lebanon?
And to all that dwelt upon the sea coast, and to those among the nations that were of Carmel and Galad. Where's that?
Getting towards Israel at this point.
Okay, and the higher Galilee. I vaguely know where that is. And the great plain of Esdraelon?
Sure.
Any clue as to
Nope.
where? No, I've never heard that word before in my life.
Yeah, so basically, everywhere from at this point, we're from everywhere from Persia to the northern border of, the northern border of Israel, which would be most of the land under the control of the Syrian or the Persian Empire at that time.
Yeah, and
so this is not making sense.
And a quick Google, doing a quick Google search turns up literally nothing useful.
Right, because none of this is true.
Obviously not.
Not only is none of it true, it's not even plausible. If you have a very rudimentary knowledge of history of that region and that time period, holy shit, this is bullshit. This is insane.
I'm glad. I'm an idiot who lives in a trailer park and I'm confused with this, and you're somebody who's been to seminary who in theory should understand it, and you're confused. I feel so much better now.
Oh, no. See, I went to Adventist colleges and the Adventist seminary. Adventists believe this book to be bullshit.
Well, yeah.
It's the Apocrypha. That's crazy Catholic stuff.
Yeah, but...
And the Catholics don't even take it seriously.
How could anyone take it seriously?
Yeah.
Okay, you get 9 and 10?
Yep. And to all that were in Samaria and the cities thereof, and beyond Jordan, unto Jerusalem, and Bethane, and Shelis, and Cades, and the river of Egypt, and Taphanes, and Ramses, and all the land of Geshem, until ye come upon Tanis and Memphis, and to all the inhabitants of Egypt, until ye come to the borders of Ethiopia.
That's a pretty wide-ranging war.
Yeah. So, Tehran to the Upper Nile.
Yeah. And, Ethiopia is on the Horn of Africa, more or less. It's not the exact horn, because pretty close to that is Somalia. Wow. Somaliland, I don't remember how they've broken it up, and all that clusterfuck.
Yeah.
But that's a huge area, which, with modern technology, unless you're in a plane, takes you a long time to get around.
Uh-huh. And most, if not all of this, would have been under the control of the Syrian Empire, or the Persian Empire, not a king in Nineveh.
Yeah. And
Nineveh had been destroyed by this time.
Right. And depending on exactly when this would have been, the Romans would have been poking around in some of this stuff as well.
This would have actually been pre-Roman. This would have been right before Alexander the Great.
Yeah, okay. So the Romans were poking around in Italy and not outside the area, but they would have certainly been familiar with those parts. Yeah. To some degree. Okay.
Yeah, to some.
Yeah. And let's see here. Verse 10, until ye come beyond Tanis and Memphis, and to all the inhabitants of Egypt, until ye come to the borders of Ethiopia. Wow. But all the inhabitants of the land made light of the commandment of Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians. Neither went they with him to the battle, for they were not afraid of him. Yea, he was before them as one man, and they sent away his ambassadors from them without effect and with disgrace. So basically, none of this shit happened, even though we're claiming it happened, yet we're admitting it didn't happen. Am I wrong there?
Yeah, because if he was the great king, then all these people would have cared.
Right. And they say they don't care. What? I can't wrap my head around any of this.
Okay, so it kind of sounds like right now, if Assad in Syria were to tell Israel, Jordan, Egypt, Iraq, and Iran that they need to help him go to war with Pakistan, they're all gonna laugh. And if he threatens to invade them if they don't, they're probably going to beat him to the punch.
People believe this shit. Okay.
Oh, this is the Apocrypha. Very, very few people believe this is really anything.
Yeah.
But some do.
I'll take your word for it, because I can't keep a straight face at the moment. Go ahead with your
Oh, yes. Verse 12, right?
That sounds good to me.
Yeah. Therefore, Nebuchadnezzar was very angry with all this country and swore by his throne and kingdom that he would surely be avenged upon those coasts of Cilicia and Damascus and Syria, and that he would slay with the sword all the inhabitants of the land of Moab and the children of Ammon and all Judea and all that were in Egypt, till ye come to the borders of the two seas. Then he marched in battle array with his power against King Arphaxad in the 17th year, and he prevailed in his battle, for he overthrew all the power of Arphaxad and all his horsemen and all his chariots.
Well, obviously those weren't iron chariots. Excuse me. Iron chariots?
No, those are only a problem for God.
One of the pseudo science channels like Discovery or PBS or National Geographic did a thing where they reconstructed an Egyptian chariot.
Okay.
Which was actually pretty cool because, they were really well made for what they were. But, they're tinfoil compared to anything we have now.
Mm-hmm.
But wow, I just don't know. Okay.
You're right, especially since nobody beat the Persians ever until Alexander. Well, except for the Greeks. Battle Marathon. They won there.
Yeah.
And then nobody beat them again after that until Alexander.
Yeah.
And this would have all been stuff going on within the Persian Empire.
Yeah. I'm not going to pretend any of it makes sense. Okay. So 13, I think, is mine?
Yes. Yep.
Then he marched in battle array with his power against King Arphaxad? I don't know. In the 17th year, and he prevailed in his battle. For he overthrew all the power of Arphaxad and all his horsemen and all his chariots. And he became lord of his cities and came unto Ecbatana, and took the towers and spoiled the streets thereof and turned the beauty thereof into shame.
Yeah. Yep. He took also Aphoraxid in the mountains of Ragau and smote him through with his darts and destroyed him utterly that day. So he returned afterwards to Nineveh, both he and all of his company of sundry nations, being a very great multitude of men of war, and where he took his ease and banqueted both he and his army in 120 days. Yep, he went back to Nineveh, a city that was ruins at that time.
And had a party that lasted
4 months?
Yeah. Okay.
Well, one thing that's kind of funny here is this all started in the 12th year. It wasn't until his 17th year that he actually started the battle. So it took him 5 years to raise his army.
Right. And where does he fit in among, like, Cyrus the Great, Cyrus II, and Xerxes?
One of their subjects? The Persian Empire didn't last that long.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I don't know. Okay.
Oh.
Okay. Let's see here. And this is, what, chapter 2, I guess?
Yep.
And in the 18th year, the 20th day, why can't they say the 22nd day?
Because this is too old.
Of the first month, which, would that be January? Or because I know, like, the Romans had, you know, their New Year's was in a different part of the year than ours?
I think this would be the way they're counting it all. It'd be in royal time frames, so it's all since time being counted since his coronation.
Okay. There was talk in the house of Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians, that he should, as he said, avenge himself on all the earth. Meaning that tiny little circle that everything in the Bible takes place, ignoring, you know, the continents of North and South America, Australia, Antarctica, you know, Indonesia, Micronesia, and a whole shitload of other places. So he called unto him all his officers and all his nobles, and communicated with them his secret counsel, and concluded the afflicting of the whole earth out of his own mouth. Okay, so he wants to bitch slap the planet, but doesn't even know 2/3 of it actually exists.
Yeah. And I've been to the Middle East. I've been to Jordan and part of Israel, and it was all so tiny. Nothing was more than a few-hour drive. Yeah. Tiny.
Yeah, okay.
Then they decreed to destroy all flesh that did not obey the commandment of his mouth. And when he had entered his council, Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians, called Holofernes, the chief captain of his army, which was next unto him, and said unto him,
Thus saith the great king, the Lord of the whole earth, Behold, thou shalt go forth from my presence, and take with thee men that trust in their own strength of footmen, 120,000. So that would be 120,000?
Mm-hmm.
And the number of horses with their riders, 12,000. And thou shalt go against all the west country, because they disobeyed my commandment.
That's a pretty big army.
Yeah, that's a pretty big army, especially for that period of time.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And thou shalt declare unto that they prepare for me earth and water, for I will go forth in my wrath against them, and will cover the whole face of the earth with the feet of mine army, and I will give them for a spoil unto them, so that their slain shall fill their valleys and brooks, and the river shall be filled with their dead, till it overflow.
Well, that's sort of what happens in the Book of Mormon, but there's no mention of, 2 entire fucking continents that nobody knows about for thousands of years later. All right. Let's see here. And I will lead them captives to the utmost parts of all the earth. Thou therefore shalt go forth and take beforehand for me all their coasts, and if they will yield themselves unto thee, thou shalt reserve them for me till the day of their punishment. So is that like saying, yeah, go ahead and capture them, because I want to use them as my sex slaves?
Yeah, sex slaves, other slaves, target practice. Yeah, something like that.
All right.
But concerning them that rebel, let not thine eye spare them, but put them to the slaughter, and spoil them wheresoever thou goest. For as I live, and by the power of my kingdom, whatsoever I have spoken, that will I do by mine hand.
Well, shit, dude. If you're that good, you go ahead and do it, and we'll stay here and watch.
Yeah.
And take thou heed that thou transgress none of the commandments of thy Lord. And which Lord would that be? But accomplish them fully as I have commanded thee, and defer not to do them. Huh?
The Lord would be Nebuchadnezzar.
Okay. And, but accomplish them fully as I have commanded thee, and defer not to do them. So, is that saying, go ahead and kill all those assholes that I told you to do?
Yeah.
Okay. That kind of makes sense, but not really. Then the Holofernes went forth from the presence of his lord, I guess that's Nebuchadnezzar, and called Ale, I'm assuming that's supposed to be all, the governors and captains and the officers of the army of Assur. Who the fuck is Assur?
I don't know, but he probably enjoyed his ale.
Okay. You've got the next two.
And he mustered the chosen men for the battle, and his lord, or as his lord had commanded him. Yeah, as his lord had commanded him, unto 120,000 and 12,000 archers on horseback. And he ranged them as a great army is ordered for the war.
Okay,
paper was really expensive back then, and they're wasting a lot of it here.
Have you ever looked up how to make paper out of papyrus?
Yeah,
it's a pretty fucking labor-intensive process.
Yeah, like, and in this time period, a book, like, and by a book, we're talking like 100 pages, would have cost a year's wages.
Yeah, at least.
So if you adjust for inflation and go with average salary, which right now is what median income in the U.S. is like $36,000.
Rough.
A $36,000 book, and they wasted $3,000 writing this.
At least.
And so much of this is why so much detail.
And this is
the good stuff comes later.
And this isn't even the worst. I mean, like, huge portions of Esdras were devoted to, stupid genealogy crap. Like, Bubba left the city and he brought with him the slaves, who was, nose picker, who was the son of ass raper, who was the son of buttfucker, who was the son of Dingleberry, who was the son of Cornhole, who was the...
Yeah. And this story doesn't... Like, this particular story, Judith, it gets better, but it's so hard to get there.
Yeah. Okay, and... Where did you stop?
I finished with 16. So you've got 17.
Okay. And he took camels and asses for the carriages. What? No locomotives? No airplanes? No troop transports? No Humvees? A very great number, and sheep and oxen and goats without number for their provision. Okay. And plenty of victual. Well, that's kind of what the goats were for every man of the army. And very much gold and silver out of the king's house. Why are you taking gold and silver?
Hey, you gotta have money so you can buy more food for the people.
What?
Except that's not how armies operated back then.
No, it was pretty much just smash and grab.
Yeah. You get your food by stealing it as you go. Wow.
Okay.
Then he went forth and all his power to go before King Nebuchadnezzar in the voyage, and to cover all the face of the earth westward with their chariots and horsemen and their chosen footmen. A great number, also sundry countries came with them like locusts and like the sand of the earth, where the multitude was without number.
Okay.
Okay, so there was 120,000, and then another 20,000, and then everybody else.
Call me skeptical.
Yeah. Yeah, the odds that a minor local ruler in the Persian Empire would have been able to get that many soldiers? Not likely.
Well, the archaeological record of such an event would be overwhelming.
Yeah. And of course, there is also the fact that they're starting from a city that did not exist in this time period.
You're the expert on the subject, so I'll defer to you on that.
Looking at the Nineveh entry in Wikipedia, it was sacked in 612 BC, and its ruins were across the river from a modern-day major city of Mosul, which emerged from the 5th century BC Assyrian town of Mepsila, which is the city that would have better fit with this story. But no, they went with Nineveh. Nineveh didn't exist.
The next thing you'll be telling me is that it's impossible. It took 40 years to go from Egypt to Israel. All right. Let me see here.
21.
Yeah. And they went forth of Nineveh 3 days' journey towards the plain of Bechteleth. You tell me. You.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds good enough.
I mean, you speak ancient languages better than I do, and
I studied them. That doesn't mean I speak them.
You have a better familiarity with him than I do. And pitched from Bechteleth, because I just want to say Batleth, near the mountains, which is at the left hand of the Upper Sicilia. And then he took his army, his footmen, and his horsemen. Oh, yes, because heaven forfend, he takes the horsemen, but not the footmen, and chariots, and went from thence into the hill country, where men and sheep are nervous.
Yeah, this isn't a time period where they didn't use spaces between words, because paper was so expensive, and they had to spell out his army.
Well,
his footmen and horsemen and chariots.
Well, and
the army.
Depending on which time period it is, they may have actually not even bothered with the vowels.
Very true. Yeah, depending on which language this was actually written in originally. And actually, no, none at that point. Only the Greeks were really all that big with using vowels.
Yeah.
Ah, man. And destroyed FUD and Lud.
I'm sorry, FUD. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And Lud.
Yep.
Well, that's where the Luddites come from.
Yeah. And he spoiled all the children of Rasses and the children of Israel, which were toward the wilderness at the south of the land of the Chaldeans. Then he went over Euphrates and went through Mesopotamia and destroyed all the high cities that were upon the river Arboni till ye come to the sea. Persian Gulf, maybe?
Your guess is as good as mine. Arabian Sea, Persian Gulf.
Through Mesopotamia, but high cities that were on the river. I don't know what Arboni is. So he's at some sea now.
Yeah. And he took the borders of Sicilia and killed all that resisted him and came to the borders of Japheth, which were toward the south over and against Arabia. So somewhere around Saudi.
Yeah.
But exactly where? I don't know. He compassed also all the children of Madian, and burned up their tabernacles and spoiled their sheepcoats. Okay, what the fuck is a sheepcoat?
Well, one problem with the King James is you need to interpret it into a modern language.
Yeah. That's putting it mildly. Oh! According to Google, it's a sheep pen.
Okay.
Yeah. You know the joke about the Scotsman sitting there bitching about, you build a barn, nobody calls you McCallum the barn builder. You build a bridge, nobody calls you McCallum the bridge builder, but you fuck one sheep!
Yeah. Then he went down into the plain of Damascus in the time of wheat harvest and burnt up all the fields and destroyed their flocks and herds. Also he spoiled their cities and utterly wasted their countries and smote all the young men with the edge of the sword.
Sparing the young women because, what have civilians always been? Soldiers' pay.
Now, so one thing that's kind of interesting here. So he goes from what's now, basically the semi-autonomous region of Kurdistan down through Iraq to Kuwait, and then goes back up through Syria before he turns back south.
Got me.
That seems to be wasting time.
Yeah, it could be. Go ahead and do 28.
Okay. Therefore, the fear and dread of him fell upon all the inhabitants of the seacoast, which were in Sidon and Tyrus, and them that dwelt in Sur and Osina, and all that dwelt in Gimnanon, and they that dwelt in Azotus and Ascalon feared him greatly. So the Syrian coast.
Okay, and there was a ages ago. I'm going to be revealing my age here in a moment, but way back in the early to mid 1980s, there was a story in Isaac Asimov's science fiction magazine, back when Isaac was still alive, called The Sidon in the Mirror. And I could never figure out what that meant or what it had to do with the story, because the story was basically, an advanced technological civilization had figured out how to alter stars somehow so that they could put mining operations on them and extract, it was never really clear what they were doing on those stars, but they somehow altered the stars so that they could put a base on there and people could actually walk around on them, even if they, had to wear spacesuits. So I knew the term had some biblical origin, but I still haven't been able to figure out what the reference was to as far as the title went. And this just doesn't help me at all.
All right.
Sorry, that's just one of those random tangents that pops into my head when reading. Well, what makes some of William S. Burroughs' novels seem coherent narratives? I don't know if you're familiar with Burroughs' method of writing.
No, I'm not.
Okay, he used what he called the cut-up method. Basically, he'd write up a page, cut it in 4 pieces, and scramble them.
Huh.
And the text on that page may or may not have been original to him as well. He would incorporate certain lines as he was writing from various sources that he thought was relevant to what he was talking about. So, in the middle of a sentence, he'd suddenly drop in a line from, say, James Joyce or whomever, or Shakespeare, whomever. And then, he'd cut the page up and switch it around, and it would become kind of scrambled, so you really couldn't point it out. Bowie adopted that method for some of his songwriting, but I can't remember which songs it was. I think Changes may have been one of them, but there were others. Okay, and where did we stop?
The end of chapter 2.
Okay. All right. So we'll do 3 and we'll stop at 6. How does that sound?
Okay. Before we get to the good stuff.
Well, if you want to come back and do the good stuff at some point, we can.
Oh, we've got to do the good stuff.
Yeah. So they sent ambassadors unto him to treat of peace, saying, Behold, we the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, who actually didn't obey him, the great king, lie before thee, use us as shall be good in thy sight.
Okay.
That opens up some disturbing possibilities.
Yeah. Behold our houses and all our places and all our fields of wheat and flocks and herds and all the lodges of our tents lie before thy face. Use them as it pleaseth thee. Behold, even our cities and the inhabitants thereof are thy servants. Come and deal with them as seemeth good unto thee.
Uh-oh.
So fuck whatever you want, basically.
Pretty much. So the men came unto Holofernes? Is that right?
Holofernes or Holofernes?
I'm sorry, but Holofernes, it's like a 3D projection of a fern that's not really there.
Yeah.
And declared unto him after this manner. Then he came down toward the sea coast, both he and his army, and set garrisons in the high places, and took out of them the chosen men for aid. I'm not even going to hazard a guess as to what any of that could possibly mean.
So they and all the country round about received them with garlands, with dances, and with timbrels. Yet he did cast down their frontiers and cut down their groves, for he had decreed to destroy all the gods of the land, that all nations should worship Nebuchadnezzar only, and that all tongues and tribes should call upon him as God. Yeah. cut down the sacred trees and knock down the high places and the standing stones.
Okay. Also, he came over against Esdraelon, near unto Judea, over against the great strait of Judea. So he's attacking the ocean now. And, and he pitched between Geba and Scythopolis, and there he tarried a whole month that he might gather together all the carriages of his army.
Okay.
It means nothing to me. I have no clue as to where any of those places might be, other than Judea.
Ish.
Yeah. And when I think of Judea, I think of the People's Front of Judea, or the Front for the People of Judea, or whatever it is in the life of Brian. I'm sorry. Go ahead with Judith 4.
Now the children of Israel that dwelt in Judea heard all that Holofernes, the chief captain of Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians, had done to the nations, and after what manner he had spoiled all their temples and brought them to naught. Therefore they were exceedingly afraid of him, and were troubled for Jerusalem, and for the temple of the Lord their God.
So, what's going to happen next? Dun dun dun! Is he going to sack the temple of Judea, or not? For they were newly returned from the captivity, so I'm guessing he's not going to do it. And the people of Judea were lately gathered together, and the vessels and the altar and the house were sanctified after the profanation. Fucking speak English. That's all I have to say about that. Therefore they sent unto all the coasts of Samaria and the villages, and to Bethron and Belman and Jericho, and to Choba and Asora, and to the valley of Salem. Okay?
So newly returned from the captivity, and they just finished the temple. So we're probably at roughly the reign of Darius or Darius.
It would end of Xerxes, beginning of Darius.
Yeah,
somewhere around in there, which would put this, if you believe any of this bullshit, around the time of the events in the books of Esdras.
Yeah,
which made no reference to anything like this. But then again, the books of Esdras were basically about some guy bitching at people and then wandering out in the wilderness and eating a whole bunch of poppies.
Oh, nice.
Well, I mean, it talks about him eating flowers, and then he has all these weird visions. You know, that's probably poppies. You know? Okay,
yeah. Hey, at least explain it.
You know, I mean, he spent 3 weeks starving himself and then goes into a field and begins eating flowers and has hallucinations about 12-headed eagles and shit like that. I'm thinking he's doing some good drugs. Maybe I'm wrong,
Good for him.
But I don't know. Okay.
And possessed themselves before all the tops of the high mountains and fortified the villages that were in them and laid up victuals for the provision of war, for their fields were of late reaped. Also, Hokim the high priest, which was in those days in Jerusalem, wrote to them that dwelt in Bethulia and Bet-o-Mestham, which is over against Esdraelon, toward the open country near Dothaim.
You got any fucking clues as to where that could possibly be?
They're somewhere in Israel.
Okay.
Actually, what would now be the West Bank.
Okay. Charging them to keep the passages of the hill country, For by them there was an entrance into Judea. Well, yeah, that's what a passage means. Entrance. And it was easy to stop them that would come up because the passage was straight, as opposed to gay or bi, for the 2 men at the most. Okay. I'm not even.
It's narrow.
Yeah.
It's a narrow passage.
And the children of Israel did as Joachim the high priest had commanded them, with the ancients of all people of Israel which dwelt at Jerusalem. And Joachim is the guy that is often thought of as Khan's son in The Wrath of Khan, who never got another gig again because his agent said, well, we'll take more money and you don't have to give us credit in the film. Poor fucker. I mean, he did a good job in the movie, and because his agent screwed him over, he has no career.
Then every man of Israel cried to God with great fervency, and with great vehemency did they humble their souls, both they and their wives and their children and their cattle, and every stranger and hireling and their servants bought with money, put sackcloth on their loins. Their cattle put sackcloth on their loins.
I'm sure you don't know this, but I don't have a car, and because the fucking cab companies in this town are run by literal neo-Nazis. I mean, they're fans of the Sons of Confederate Veterans, okay?
Oh, okay.
Which are, people who think the South was right in the Civil War. So I don't use them, which means if I want to go anywhere, I either have to find some stupid friend of mine willing to give me a ride or I gotta walk. Chafing is a real fucking issue. So, they put a burlap sack over themselves.
Yep.
No.
And their cows.
Yeah, that's not really a comfortable way of doing anything.
That's actually the point. They do that to increase their misery.
Yeah, but I mean,
so that God will have sorrow on them.
Yeah, but I mean, I use comfortable modern stitched clothing, and I'm, irritated if I don't take the proper precautions.
Mm-hmm.
Sackcloth back then would have been coarse as sandpaper.
Yep.
So it wouldn't have been merely uncomfortable. It could have potentially been fatal because you rub something the wrong way, you're gonna get an infection, and with no antibiotics, you're a goner.
Yeah.
Okay. So God heard their prayers. Or he heard the friction from their junk rubbing what gets...
Well, the friction helps amplify their prayers.
And looked upon their afflictions, for the people fasted many days in all Judea and Jerusalem before the sanctuary of the Lord Almighty. Okay. I thought Jerusalem was in Judea. Am I wrong?
It is.
Okay.
But often mentioned separately.
All right. And Joachim the high priest and all the priests that stood before the Lord, and which means doesn't mention Esdras, who was a high priest, and they which ministered unto the Lord. I've read a few erotic novels that talk about ministering, if you know what I mean. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Had their loins, Jesus, girt with sackcloth. Yes, because I like sandpaper on my junk. And offered the daily burnt offerings, i.e., fried chicken. with the vows and free gifts of the people, and had ashes on their mitres, and cried unto the Lord with all their power that he would look upon the house of Israel graciously. What's the scene in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where they have the monks going, in excess de requiem, and then bashing themselves in the head with a book? That just sort of...
Well, see, God's favorite thing to get his attention is burning flesh. And if that's not enough, then pain and suffering.
Yeah, because God's got a serious kink.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Then was it declared to Holofernes, the chief captain of the army of Assur, that the children of Israel had prepared for war, and had shut up the passages of the hill country, and had fortified all the tops of the high hills, and had laid impediments in the Champagne countries. They have champagne there? Oh. Wherewith he was very angry, and called on the princes of Moab, and the captains of Ammon, and all the governors of the seacoast.
Yeah, champagne.
I wonder if he told them, if the people had warned him about all the chafing that was going on.
Good question. And he said unto them, Tell me now, ye sons of Chanaan, who this people is. Wait, so fucking God doesn't know who these assholes are?
Oh, this would be Holofernes.
Okay.
Still, he should know.
Yeah. That dwelleth in the hill country, and what are the cities that they inhabit, and what is the multitude of their army, and wherein is their power and strength, and what king is set over them, or captains of their army? And why have they determined not to come and meet me more than all the inhabitants of the west? Well, I don't know. You're some crazy psychopath, and they want to just stay at home rather than going out and talking with you.
Hey, they're in the Champagne countries.
Yeah.
You know what they're doing.
Yeah. Getting hammered.
Yeah. Then said Achor, the captain of all the sons of Ammon, Let my lord now hear a word from the mouth of thy servant, and I will declare unto thee the truth concerning this people which dwelleth near thee, and inhabiteth the hill countries. And there shall no lie come from the mouth of thy servant. This people are descended from the Chaldeans.
Which would be the Babylonians.
Yeah.
Isn't that... I'm sorry. I'm not even going to try to figure out who is fighting whom in this book.
Well, at this point, the Ammonites and Moabites had already given up. So those would be the people in Jordan.
Right.
And he's asking about what's going on in the hill country on the other side of the river. Literally on the other side of the Great Rift Valley. Well, not the Great Rift Valley, that's more in Africa, but the Jordan Valley, which is 1,000 feet deep, like 1,000 feet below sea level. Ammon and other areas where the Ammonites and Moabites were is like 3,000 or 4,000 feet up. And where Jerusalem is also like 4,000 feet up. So we're talking you have to go 5,000 feet down to go 5,000 feet up to find out what's going on. It may not be big, but there's a lot of elevation.
Right. I can understand that living where I do. It's one of those things where it's easier to say, well, not now with the whole cell phone thing and long distance being a non-issue, but back when, phone calls were long distance, it was easier to walk to your neighbor's house to talk to them than call them because they might live on the other side of the hill, but that was, 2 feet from you, whereas if you went by the phone lines, that was a long distance call.
The end of 6.
6. And they sojourned heretofore in Mesopotamia. It seems like the geography is skipping around a bit.
Yeah, the Chaldeans lived in Mesopotamia.
Because they would not follow the gods of their fathers, which were in the land of Chaldea. That seems a bit spurious to me.
Abraham?
Yeah, but he wasn't a Chaldean.
Yeah, he was. Ish.
He was the first Jew. Depending on...
Well... Which came first, the chicken or the egg? In this case, which came first, the Jew or the Chaldean?
I don't know. Let's ask Ken Ham. I'm sure he's got a good answer. For they that left the way of their ancestors and worshipped the God of heaven, the God whom they knew, Abraham was like the first Jew, so he'd be like the first guy who kind of knew God. You know, forget the whole thing about Adam actually meeting God, etc., etc. So they cast him out from the face of their gods. Who cast whom?
The Chaldeans.
Right. And they fled into Mesopotamia, meaning they just walked in a big old circle and sojourned there many days. What's many days?
Yeah, they're just telling the story of Abraham. Then their God commanded them to depart from the place where they sojourned and go to the land of Canaan, where they dwelt, and were increased with gold and silver and with very much cattle. But when a famine covered all the land of Canaan, they went down into Egypt and sojourned there, where they were nourished and became there a great multitude, so that one could not number their nation.
Sort of seems like it's referring to the whole Joseph in the coat of many colors.
So yeah, we've gone from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob to Joseph, and now we're to Moses. Almost.
Yeah, in like 3 lines.
Yeah. They're finally being concise.
It'll never happen again, I'm sure. Therefore, the king of Egypt rose up against them and dealt subtly with them. Really? Really? Exodus is subtle? And brought them low with laboring in brick and made them slaves.
Yep, that's plenty subtle.
Yeah. Fun fact, the archaeological evidence indicates there were no slaves building pyramids.
Well, there were, but that was the Egyptians.
Well,
the concept of slave was meaningless then, because you were either in the royal family, a priest, or a slave.
Right. And,
in other words, a peasant.
And their slaves had it pretty good that were building the pyramids and things like that, because, you know, they had they had government provided housing and medical care and paid sick days. You know, basically everything any sane American would kill for now.
Actually, they worked about 16 hours a day, 7 days a week for 9 months, and then had to go back to their farms.
Yeah, well,
they didn't have all that good of a life then, but they had beer.
Yeah, but they had a better life than what's, presented in the Bible.
Yeah. Then they cried unto their God, and he smote all the land of Egypt with incurable plagues, so the Egyptians cast them out of their sight. And God dried up the Red Sea before them.
That never fucking happened.
Nope.
No.
None of it did.
Nope.
There is zero evidence.
Yeah. Because if you believe the Bible, by the time the last group of Egypt, or the last group of Israelites left Egypt, the first group would have been settled in Israel for like months. Okay. And he brought them to Mount Sinai and Kadesh Barn? Is that like, the alternative version of Barnes and Nobles? And cast forth all that dwelt in the wilderness. What the fuck does that even mean? Does he turn them all into hermits? Or does he, drive out the hermits who are living in the wilderness? I don't understand. So they dwelt in the land of the Amorites. Yeah, you guys might live here, but fuck you. We're taking your shit anyways. Mm-hmm. And they destroyed by their strength all them of Ezebon. Who were those?
Heshbon.
Oh,
I've actually been there.
Okay. Who the fuck?
A candidate site for it. Nobody has been able to prove that Heshbon actually existed. And they keep digging up cities that might possibly be it. I was digging at one candidate site that isn't. And I went to the 40th anniversary commemoration for the Tal Heshbon project. There was a Jordanian prince and the U.S. ambassador there, actually. That was pretty cool.
Which Jordanian prince was it?
I don't remember which one, but he was a prince, I think a cousin of the king.
Ah.
And the U.S. ambassador had heavier security.
I am Jack's complete lack of surprise. And
yeah, 6 Suburbans, I think 10 or 12 diplomatic security personnel. The ambassador arrived literally seconds before the event started, and as soon as the ceremony was done, he was gone.
Yeah. I'm not really surprised. I've been at a few events in 84, I was at events at an event with Ronald Reagan, and it was, you showed up hours early, went through security, hung out, Reagan showed up, disappeared into the building, and then was gone a short time later. There was, and I can only imagine that in the years since, it's gotten more restrictive for important government officials in places.
Oh, yeah.
Places that could be considered war zones.
Jordan's far from a war zone, but still, they were not taking chances.
Yeah. I mean, they're not that far from one.
Yeah. And they cast forth before them the Canaanite, the Perizzite, the Jebusite, and the Scythemite, or Sychemite, and all the Girgasites, and they dwelt in the country many days. And whilst they sinned not before their God, they prospered, because a God that hath iniquity was with them.
Who the fuck are these people?
And now at this point, the Israelites.
Yeah, well, I know that, and this is my favorite thing to say, the term for Jerusalem before the Jews took it over was Jebus. So I'm assuming that the Jebusite are people who were from Jerusalem, but who were the Sychemites, the Girgasites, the Pharisaites. I've never heard.
There were other tribes.
Yeah, okay. And why don't you go ahead and tell everybody about your show, since it was one of my inspirations for getting into podcasting.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I'm the host of the Atheist Nomads. On that show, I'm joined by Wesley and also my wife, Lauren. And we've recently changed up the format a little bit, but we usually start off with a segment we call Dusting Off the Degree, where I explain some kind of a theological, religious history type topic taking advantage of my bachelor's degree in theology and year of seminary education. And then from there, we move into discussing news and current events. We generally try to stick with the news to things where it's not just a case of a religious person being bad. Usually it needs to be somebody trying to force their religion on others, church-state separation violations, or church officials being bad. So we try to have the bar, a little bit higher than just your average whack job.
Right.
And we also do get a bit of science every now and then, and we do the show on a weekly basis and have guests joining us on occasion as well.
That's it for this episode of the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, as well as just about anywhere else podcasts can be found. Many of the episodes are also on YouTube. Follow the show on Twitter. @TParkAtheist is the show's Twitter handle. It's on Facebook at facebook.com/trailerparkatheist.com. If you happen to like the podcast, please rate it on iTunes. If you'd like to support the podcast, there's a donate button on the show notes page. You can support it via Patreon at patreon.com/TNTucker. Thanks for listening.
Say goodnight, Fuzz-Nuts.
All I know is this violates every canon of respectable broadcasting.
Damned cat.